Back on Big Ten today, coming at you from Chicago as we look ahead to football and some of the marquee games in the 18-team Big Ten non-conference, highlighted by defending national champ Michigan taking on a fellow playoff team in Texas. Bama's got the Badgers. Conference games, Ohio State at Oregon on October 12th. That feels like, to me anyway, the biggest game on the schedule. You got two national title contenders there. Buckeyes also go to State College, and then, of course, Michigan and Ohio State caps off the year. Annually, the most anticipated game in the league. It is in Columbus this season. No one that I know loves a schedule more than Scott Dockerman of The Athletic. He joins us now. And, Scott, let's start there. Is there a Big Ten game that you're most looking forward to? Like, to me, it's Ohio State, Oregon, I think is the one that jumps out at me. How about for you?
You know, I would probably have to start Michigan and Ohio State. That's almost by default, though, for the last, 70 years that these two teams are going to be number one. And then that's easy because the Wolverines have won the last three, and this has really got to be Ryan Day's biggest game of his career probably coming up this year. But I really like what you said there about Ohio State and Oregon on October 12th. That is really good. That's kind of what the essence of this new expansion is, getting marquee teams in front of the most eyeballs as you can. And these two teams, to me, are probably the best two going forward, at least this year, and both have a chance to not only make the playoff, but to have a bye in the playoff.
Yeah, I guess that's where, I make the distinction. Like, to me, I think those are the two teams that are national championship contenders or have the best chance at competing for the national championship in the league. But yeah, we'd be foolish not to say Ohio State. Michigan is hugely anticipated every single year. So we're talking about this new 18-team universe in the Big Ten. Scott, I want to kind of bring people up to date post-spring. One of the storylines, obviously, will be new coaches. There are 6 new coaches in the Big Ten if you include David Braun at Northwestern. He was the interim a year ago, obviously the full-time head coach now. Which is the coaching transition that interests you the most?
It probably has to be at Washington, I think, with Jedd Fisch, because going from Arizona to Washington, that was a intra-conference move at the time. But I think looking at Washington being a national championship finalist and now having their coach leave for Alabama in Kalen DeBoer, and now having Jedd Fisch go to Washington with 30 guys entering the portals. They had 10 plus that ended up in the NFL draft. It's a complete new era in Washington. And so I think the game to watch when it comes to the coaching ranks is probably Michigan and Washington, because you got 2 new ones with Sherrone Moore. But at least he had some experience as the interim coach last year for the Wolverines. So I think I would have to start with Washington just because of where they were last year and now the changes that they've made.
And as you said, the roster turnover is just staggering as well when you compare it to the college football playoff, the national championship game. You only have 2 starters back from that team. It is just amazing. So it is a challenge for Jedd Fisch, but a lot of good stuff in place there in Seattle. We're talking about the new playoff format, 12 teams, and I think it's something that people are just starting to kind of wrap their head around. Is there a team that you believe in the Big Ten has the most pressure this year to make that 12-team field, Scott?
To make the 12-team field, I think it's Penn State. Yeah. They've been close a lot over the last several years. They probably, in a 12-team field, probably would have made it 5 or so times since 2016. And they've been close. They have a great quarterback. They've got a good supporting cast. They may have the best defensive player in the Big Ten in Abdul Carter, who's moving to edge. But there's a lot of pressure there. You've got to get past Ohio State and Michigan. They were a proponent of scrapping divisions, not having any rivals. And now is your chance. You can break through, not even worrying about getting a Big Ten championship, but getting to the playoffs. So I think the most pressure this year just to get to a playoff has to be in Penn State.
Yeah, I'm with you. And obviously you have 2 new coordinators. Tom Allen, interestingly, taking over as the defensive coordinator after Manny Diaz's departure to Duke. But yeah, I would say Penn State. I think Ohio State has to make it because they're going to come in and, for a lot of people, maybe even the preseason #1 team. And if you don't make it, given what's happened here over the last few years against Michigan as well. That turns up the pressure, but I'd be shocked if they don't make it, I think, given the roster composition there. You cover Iowa really closely. I'm interested there. They made an offensive coordinator change. Some would say it was long overdue. Tim Lester is the new OC. Just give us a sense for the Hawkeyes, a team that, as we know, made it to the Big Ten championship game a year ago, and what you've seen that's different here in the spring.
It was really tough to gauge Iowa's offense this spring because their starting quarterback, Cade McNamara, is still overcoming that ACL injury from last September. And Deacon Hill, who started the majority of games, ended up entering the transfer portal. So you didn't gauge a whole lot of what they could do, but I tried to watch the other 10 guys around the quarterback, and I saw a lot more motion. I saw better spacing with the passing routes, and I saw the offensive line get vertical on Iowa's defense a little bit more often than I have in the past. I mean, that's a really good defense. It's returning just about everyone from last year. I think they have 6 guys who went back for their extra year of eligibility. So any kind of movement on that defense is going to be good for Iowa's offense. So they've got a long way to go to be respectable, but I think that they have an opportunity to be much better this year.
Yeah, it's interesting, Scott. You and I have covered this league for so long, and I think everyone who's covered it, or even just fans, kind of getting out of the mindset of divisions, right? There are no divisions left in the Big Ten, but I still think in terms of, Iowa, Wisconsin, Northwestern, all these are the schools from the West that made it to the championship game multiple times. Do you think that the mindset changes now for those schools? I mean, is it even about making the championship game, or is it just about, hey, do we figure out a way to get into the 12-team playoff? Even if that doesn't mean being in the top 2 in the league, because there will certainly be, I'd be shocked if there isn't a team that makes it to the playoff that doesn't make it to the Big Ten championship game. Like, do you think that they change their mentality from, well, we're just kind of competing with these other 6 to now how do we have to approach things maybe differently, particularly offensively, when you got to be in the top 2 or top 3 in the league?
I think they have to change a little bit because pretty much everybody went to like a bunker mentality in the West, which was really risk-averse offense, physical offense, great defense. And you saw that play out through the course of the last decade. Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota was that way. Nebraska played a really good defense last year. Northwestern has had really good spikes over the years, and Illinois changed to that style. So I think what they're going to have to do is be a little bit more focused offensively. Now, I think sometimes the teams in the West get a little bit maligned, and they were better than what they had shown because I think they had a higher floor, but a much lower ceiling. I do think, though, that an Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, I think they can still have eyes for the playoff, and they should be pointing towards the playoff, but getting to the championship game no longer is the end-all be-all. But I do believe that they do have the opportunity to get there because you look at Iowa, it was the only team in the West to beat every team in the East over that 10-year period. Wisconsin had some really good teams, was undefeated in 2017 all the way through to the championship game. Northwestern, as you mentioned, had some really good teams under Pat Fitzgerald, and last year was probably the surprise team in the country. So I expect those teams to be able to compete, but probably getting to number 3 is a little more realistic than getting to number 2 or 1.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's going to be fascinating to see. And again, we've seen some philosophical changes even in the offenses. Wisconsin offensively is a different team schematically than they were for years and years, and whether or not those changes materialize into more explosive offenses, I think we're going to see. Is there kind of an off-the-radar team here, Scott, that we haven't talked about? I think we kind of talked about some of the obvious, Ohio State and Michigan and Oregon, Penn State as being teams that we're talking about as potential playoff teams. Is there someone else that we haven't mentioned, maybe that won't show up in many preseason top 25s that you'll be focused on coming into this year that intrigues you the most?
I think the 2 that most intrigue me the most are the 2 in this part of the world, which is Iowa and Minnesota. I like, Iowa won 10 games last year, and I know that the offense was horrific, but you still have to win those games, and to be able to win as close as they did and have the great defense they had. I mean, they led the country in yards per play allowed, and they had 200 more snaps than the number 2 defense. And then, so if their offense just gets a little bit better, you look at their schedule. Washington doesn't look as daunting. They go to UCLA. That's not necessarily like a major type opponent, at least on paper, with the new coaching change. So, and their only real road game that you're kind of fearful of if you're Iowa is at Ohio State. And then Minnesota, there's something that I really like about this team. I think they have a really interesting quarterback in Max Brosmer coming in from New Hampshire. I like the makeup of it. They've got good line play. Last year they took a dip there, and then they got better as the year progressed. So they're probably not in a top 25 situation, but I think they could be in a very competitive case by the end of the year.
Yeah, and if you're talking about your neck of the woods, I'd say Nebraska's pretty interesting as well.
Yeah.
Coming into this year. It's going to be fascinating to see how that goes in year 2 for Matt Rhule. I'll leave you with this. The Big Ten team that you think has the best chance of making it 2 in a row for the league in terms of national championships is?
The Ohio State Buckeyes. It has to be. I mean, there hasn't been a 1-2 punch like this that we've seen since maybe Felix Jones and Darren McFadden down in Arkansas. You've got a running back right now with Quinshon Junkins and Travion Henderson. I mean, that is just amazing. And then to bring back the majority of their defense, several guys who are going to be probably top 50 picks in next year's NFL draft, it really all comes down to quarterback. And will Will Howard be that guy, or will Devin Brown step up and be the guy? I think that's really going to determine whether or not Ohio State wins the national title. But I like them as much as I do anybody in the country, and I would probably vote them number 1.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm fascinated by the Buckeyes. I think it's a huge year for them. And as you say, they are absolutely loaded, have so much coming back. It's just a weird year when Ohio State only has 4 players drafted, and that's really an indication of how much talent is coming back to Columbus more than anything. Scott, I could have done this for an entire hour, but we are out of time. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to talking to you as the offseason continues.